The morning, my granddaughter pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm at Christmas dinner and whispered, "Grandpa, read it in the bathroom." I thought she was playing one of her games. She was 23 years old, not 7, but Lily had always been playful like that, full of small surprises and secret jokes between the two of us. So I excused myself from the table, walked down the hall of my son's house in Oakville, closed the bathroom door behind me, and unfolded the paper. It was torn from the corner of a grocery receipt. The handwriting was small and pressed hard into the paper, the way you write when you're trying not to let your hand shake. "Grandpa, I think Marcus is stealing from me. I'm scared to say it out loud. Please don't tell Dad yet. Please just help me." I read it twice. Then I folded it back along its original creases, put it in my shirt pocket, flushed the toilet for appearances, and walked back to the dinner table where my son Raymond and his wife Carol were passing around the roasted potatoes, where my other grandchildren were arguing over the last of the cranberry sauce, and where Marcus Aldridge, Lily's boyfriend of 14 months, was refilling his own wine glass, without being asked, and laughing a little too loudly at something he'd said himself. I sat down. I picked up my fork. I looked at Lily across the table, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. Her shoulders dropped about half an inch. That was enough. I am 67 years old. I spent 22 years as a forensic accountant with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit in Toronto, and another 11 years after that running my own private practice, reviewing cases for insurance companies and law firms, and, occasionally, for families who suspected someone was taking advantage of someone they loved. I retired 4 years ago, mostly because my wife Patricia insisted that 63 was old enough to stop staring at spreadsheets for other people's problems, and partly because she was right. I had not told Lily any of this in detail. Children, even adult grandchildren, do not generally want to know the specifics of what their grandparents did for work. They know the broad strokes. They know I used to work for the RCMP. They know I was good at numbers. Beyond that, to Lily and her cousins, I was simply Grandpa Walter, the one who made the best scrambled eggs, who always had peppermints in his cardigan pocket, and who let them stay up past their bedtime when their parents weren't watching. Marcus Aldridge did not know any of this either. That would turn out to matter quite a lot. Lily had met Marcus at a cycling event in Hamilton the previous October. She'd been volunteering at the registration table. He'd shown up charming and late, with an expensive bike and an easy smile. He was 31, 8 years older than her, and he worked in what he vaguely described as financial wellness consulting, which I had learned over 14 months of family dinners meant that he sold investment products to people who didn't entirely understand what they were buying. He drove a leased BMW. He wore a watch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had the particular confidence of a man who has learned that confidence itself is a product you can sell. Patricia had not liked him from the first dinner. She said he never asked anyone else a question. She said he talked about money the way some men talk about sports, constantly, casually, as though assuming everyone shared the obsession. I had noticed the same things, but told myself to reserve judgment. Lily was young, and she was happy, and it was not my place to appoint myself the inspector of her personal life. That Christmas note changed things. I did not say anything to Raymond that night. Lily had asked me not to, and I understood why Raymond was protective in the heavy-handed way of fathers with daughters. And if he confronted Marcus without any real evidence, Marcus would simply deny everything, and Lily would be left in a worse position than before, possibly blamed for creating a scene at Christmas. I had seen that dynamic destroy cases. You don't move until you can move completely. Instead, that evening, after the dishes were done and the children were watching something in the living room, I found a moment alone with Lily in the kitchen, pretending to help her wrap leftovers. "Tell me what's happening," I said quietly. "Just the facts. Take your time." She kept her eyes on the tinfoil she was folding. "He asked me to add him to my investment account," she said. "Back in September. He said it made sense because we were basically partners and he could manage it better than the advisor I had. I said okay because I don't know. He made it seem obvious. Like, of course you'd want your partner involved. And then? And then I checked the account in November, and there was money missing. Not a lot at first, like $3,000. He said it was a rebalancing fee, that his firm charged it when they restructured accounts. I didn't want to make it into a big thing, so I let it go." She paused. "Last week, I checked again. There's $17,000 gone. "Grandpa, it's just gone." And when I asked him about it, he got angry and said I didn't understand how investing worked and that I was being paranoid. $17,000. Lily was a nurse. She worked long shifts and lived carefully. That money had taken years. "Do you still have access to the account statements?" I asked. "Yes." "Don't move anything. Don't change anything. Don't say anything else to him about it. Can you do that?" She finally looked at me. "You know what to do?" "I know exactly what to do," I said. "Wrap the turkey." I drove home that night with Patricia, who listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of the many reasons I have been married to her for 41 years. When I finished, she said, "I knew there was something wrong with that watch." The next morning, I called an old colleague of mine, a woman named Detective Sergeant Brenda Okafor, who had moved from the RCMP to the Ontario Securities Commission about 6 years prior. We had worked 3 cases together in the late 90s, and she was the sharpest person I had known in 22 years of financial crimes work. I told her what Lily had described without using any names yet, just the pattern of behavior, the request for joint account access, the undocumented withdrawals, the rebalancing fees that didn't correspond to any legitimate product. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Walter, that's a textbook affinity fraud setup. Junior version, but textbook. He's using the romantic relationship as access and authority. The fees are fabricated." That's what I thought. "How old is the victim?" 23. "She's my granddaughter." Another pause. "Send me what you have when you have it. I'll look at it off the record first." That same day, I called Lily and asked her to email me every statement she could pull from the account, going back to the date Marcus was added as a joint holder. I also asked her to write down, from memory, every conversation she could recall, where money had come up, dates, what was said, who else was present. She sent everything within the hour. She was frightened, and she was angry, and she was trying very hard not to show either. I spent that afternoon at my desk going through the statements with the same attention I had given to files 30 years ago. The forensic eye doesn't leave you. Once you learn to read financial documents as narrative as someone's choices, someone's intentions laid out in columns, you never stop reading them that way. What I found was not complicated. It was actually quite simple, which in my experience means the person doing it is either very confident or very lazy. In this case, I suspected both. Marcus had transferred 3 separate amounts, $3,200, $6,400, and $7,600 from Lily's investment account into an intermediary account over 8 weeks. Each transfer was coded with a reference number that, when I searched the format, corresponded to no legitimate brokerage or financial institution registered with the OSC. The rebalancing fees Lily had been told about existed nowhere in the account documentation. There was no prospectus, no fee schedule, no disclosure form. There was just money, moving out, with labels attached that were designed to sound technical enough that a 23-year-old nurse might not question them. He had also, I noticed, changed the email address associated with the account's notification settings. Account alerts were no longer going to Lily. They were going to an address I didn't recognize. That is the detail that told me everything I needed to know about his intentions. A man who makes a legitimate mistake doesn't reroute the notifications. Only a man who knows exactly what he's doing and doesn't want to be caught does that. I documented everything. Printed statements, annotated pages, a chronology typed out clearly in the format I had used for RCMP submissions for 2 decades. Then I sent the package to Brenda. She called me back the following morning. "Walter," she said, "this is enough. This is more than enough. The account address change alone would give us grounds. But I want to ask you something before we go further." "Go ahead." "Does your granddaughter want to pursue this criminally? Because once this moves, it moves fast, and it will end the relationship." "The relationship," I said carefully, "is already over. She just doesn't know how to end it safely yet." "Okay," Brenda said. "Then here's what I'd suggest." What she suggested was an approach I had used many times, careful, measured, designed to protect Lily from any legal complications while maximizing the pressure on Marcus. We would not confront him directly, not yet. We would first ensure Lily's account was secured. She would remove Marcus as joint holder, restore the notification email to her own address, and move the remaining balance to a new account he had no access to. All of this could be done without alerting him immediately, because joint account holders do not receive automatic notification when the other holder makes administrative changes. That window of time was important. While Lily did that, Brenda would run Marcus Aldridge through the OSC database and the RCMP Financial Crimes Registry, looking for prior complaints or investigations. She suspected he had done this before. In her experience, men like him rarely start with someone they love. She was right. Marcus Aldridge appeared in the OSC system under a prior complaint filed 18 months earlier by a woman in Mississauga, a complaint that had been logged but not yet investigated due to case backlog. The amounts were smaller, just under $5,000, and the woman had eventually withdrawn her complaint, which Brenda told me was common. Victims in romantic fraud cases often withdrew complaints when the emotional pressure became too much, or when the perpetrator persuaded them they had misunderstood. The Mississauga complaint plus Lily's documentation together constituted a pattern. A pattern was prosecutable. There was one more thing I wanted before anything official happened. I wanted to give Marcus the opportunity to show me who he really was, not for my own satisfaction, but because in financial crimes cases, a suspect's response to being questioned off the record often produced evidence that proved more useful than anything else. People who are guilty and confident tend to lie in very specific and documentable ways. I invited Marcus to lunch. I called him directly, which surprised him. We had never spent time together without Lily present. I said I wanted to talk about something personal, that I hoped he'd be willing to meet just the two of us, and I named a restaurant near my house in Burlington. He agreed readily. Too readily, I thought. He sounded pleased. We met on a Thursday in January. He arrived 4 minutes late, which I noted. He ordered an expensive glass of wine at noon without asking if I was drinking. He talked for the first 12 minutes about a real estate investment opportunity in Collingwood that he thought I should seriously consider, given my age and the importance of income-generating assets in retirement. I let him talk. I watched his hands, his eyes, the small adjustments he made when I asked clarifying questions. I had sat across from a great many people over the years who were hiding things, and they all shared a particular quality, a slight lag between stimulus and response, a half-second longer than honest people take, because they are running the answer through a filter before it comes out. Marcus had that lag. When he finished making his case for the Collingwood investment, I set down my water glass and said, "Marcus, I didn't ask you here to talk about investments. I asked you here to talk about Lily's account." The lag appeared. Then the smile recalibrated. "What about it?" "The $17,000, I said. "Walter, I've explained to Lily that those are standard restructuring fees. It's just part of how the product." "There are no restructuring fees," I said. "The reference numbers on those transfers don't correspond to any registered financial product in Canada." I checked. The notification email on that account was changed to an address that traces to a numbered company registered in your name in Alberta. I also found the complaint filed against you in Mississauga. He went very still. I continued, because I have found that in these moments, continuing is always more useful than pausing. I spent 22 years investigating financial crimes for the RCMP and 11 more in private practice. Lily is my granddaughter. I have a complete forensic record of every transfer, every administrative change, and a contact at the Ontario Securities Commission who is currently reviewing the file. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I wanted to have this conversation privately, as a courtesy, before the formal process begins. For about 4 seconds, Marcus Aldridge said nothing. I could see him calculating, running through what I might have, what he could deny, whether any of this was real or a bluff. He was not stupid. That was the problem with men like him. They are not stupid. They simply believe, until the very last moment, that they are smarter than everyone around them. Then he said, "She gave me access to that account voluntarily. Anything I did with it was within my rights as a joint holder. Joint holders have a fiduciary responsibility to the primary account holder," I said, "particularly when they are operating in a professional advisory capacity, which is how you presented yourself to Lily. Routing the transfers through a numbered company you control, to avoid disclosure requirements, is not a right, it's fraud." He picked up his wine glass, set it back down without drinking. "I'd like to speak to a lawyer." "That is an excellent idea," I said. "In the meantime, I'd suggest you begin thinking about restitution. A full repayment documented and completed before the OSC opens a formal investigation, carries significantly different consequences than a repayment ordered after a finding of guilt. I paid the bill. I thanked him for his time. I walked to my car and sat in the parking lot for a moment, with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling something I had not felt in 4 years, the particular quietness that comes when a case is effectively over and you know it. I called Brenda from the car and told her what had happened. She listened and said, "Did he admit anything?" No direct admission. But his response to the fiduciary argument was entirely consistent with consciousness of guilt, and he asked for a lawyer, which tells us he knows exactly what he did, she said. Good, we'll proceed. I called Patricia next. She asked me how lunch was. I said the fish was overcooked, but the conversation was productive. She said, "Did he cry?" I said no. She said, "Shame. I was hoping he'd cry." I love that woman. Within 6 days of that lunch, Marcus Aldridge transferred $17,200 back into Lily's account. The additional $200 was, I suspected, an attempt to demonstrate goodwill that he hoped might discourage further action. It did not. Brenda's investigation proceeded independently of the repayment, as I had told him it would. The Mississauga complaint was reopened. 3 months later, Marcus was charged with fraud under Section 380 of the Criminal Code and breach of fiduciary duty under the Securities Act. He lost his registration with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. His ability to sell financial products in Canada was suspended pending the outcome of proceedings. Lily removed him from her life the week after that Thursday lunch. It was not easy for her. 14 months is long enough to build a life around someone, long enough that their absence feels like a wound, even when you know, clearly and completely, that they were hurting you. She cried. She was angry. She called me late one Tuesday night and said she felt stupid. "You're not stupid," I told her. "You trusted someone who had practiced making himself trustworthy. That's not a flaw in you. That's a flaw in him." "How did you know what to do?" she asked. "I've seen this before," I said. "Not with you, with a lot of other people's grandchildren." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you ever tell me what you used to do?" "Because you never asked, and because scrambled eggs seemed more important at the time." She laughed. Not a big laugh, but a real one. That was enough. Raymond found out the full story in February, after the charges were laid. His first response was to ask why I hadn't told him sooner. His second response, after I explained Lily's reasons for wanting to keep him out of it initially, was to go very quiet, in the way that fathers go quiet when they understand that their children have been hurt and they weren't there to stop it. I told him that Lily had handled it with more clarity than most adults I'd ever worked with. I told him that she was going to be fine. He nodded and didn't say anything, but he reached across the kitchen table and gripped my shoulder for a moment. That is how Raymond expresses most of his larger emotions. I have known this since he was 9 years old. Patricia and I took Lily to dinner in March, to mark the end of it, not a celebration exactly. Because financial fraud leaves a residue that takes longer than 3 months to clear, but a marking of the moment when things were definitively different. She wore her mother's earrings and ordered the lamb, and told us about a colleague at her hospital she had started having coffee with. "Does he ask people questions?" Patricia asked. Lily looked at her. "What? Does he ask other people questions? Or does he only talk about himself?" Lily thought about it. "He asked me 3 questions the first time we had coffee," she said. "I remember because I counted." Patricia smiled. "Good," she said. "That's a good sign. The laws in Canada around investment fraud and intimate relationships have always been technically sufficient. Section 380 covers it. The fiduciary provisions cover it. What has been insufficient, historically, is the reporting because people in those relationships are ashamed, or they believe the loss was their own fault, or they love the person who harmed them enough to protect them, even at the cost of their own finances, their own dignity, their own future. If you are reading this, and something in it sounds familiar, if someone who claims to love you also manages your money, also controls your account access, also explains your own finances to you in ways that make you feel foolish for asking questions, please hear me when I say, that feeling of confusion is not an accident. Confusion is a tool. People who are genuinely managing your money well want you to understand exactly what they're doing and why. Transparency is not a burden to them. It is a basic professional obligation. You do not need to have worked 22 years in financial crimes to recognize a pattern. You need only to ask, clearly and without apology, show me the documentation. A legitimate advisor will hand it to you without hesitation. A person who is stealing from you will call you paranoid. That difference is everything. Lily put the $17,000 into a registered account in her own name, with an advisor she chose herself, and she is the only person with access to it. She called me last month to tell me it had grown by 4% since March. I told her that was excellent. I told her to keep an eye on it. She said, "I will, Grandpa. I learned from the best." I'm not sure that's entirely true, but I am sure that she is going to be fine. I have been reading people for a very long time, and I know the difference between someone who has been knocked down and someone who has been knocked down and gotten back up, understanding exactly what happened and why. Lily is the second kind. That is the only kind that matters.